What would happen if every human being on Earth disappeared? At some point in the future, this could be the fate of our planet. This isn't the story of how we might vanish. It is the story of what happens to the world we leave behind. One day after people. In the heart of Manhattan, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York still guards the vast wealth of depositors who will never return to claim it. It holds more than 500,000 gold bars, worth roughly $200 billion. The accumulated wealth of some 60 foreign governments and central banks.
There is more gold in the basement of the Federal Reserve Bank in Manhattan than has been gathered any other place on Earth and any other time in history.
The gold is stored 80 feet below street level. The narrow opening to the vault is protected by a rotating 90-ton steel cylinder that forms an air and watertight seal with the surrounding 140-ton steel and concrete frame.
The gold lasts pretty much forever. The whole point of having gold is that it doesn't corrode and doesn't tarnish. And there's nothing in nature that can dissolve gold.
Gold is one of the most non-reactive metals on Earth. So when it's exposed to air or water, its molecules resist disintegration. But other metals in New York City won't fare so well. Uptown from the Federal Reserve Bank, the steel canyon walls of Times Square are still a glittering urban shrine. But the streets have turned eerily quiet. In the time of humans, it was one of the loudest places in a very loud city. Sustained exposure to sound over 75 decibels was deemed dangerous to human ears. Yet the ambient noise here measured 80 decibels. Honking horns peaked at 90 decibels. And a passing ambulance siren screamed at 120. Now these sounds are silenced, leaving just the 50-decibel hum of thousands of air conditioning units.
A world without people would be strangely silent. In many places, the dominant sound would be birdsong.
Two days after people, the New York City power grid is failing. And so is the trademark glow of hundreds of illuminated signs. These streets have seen blackouts before. In 2003, a massive East Coast power outage plunged Times Square into darkness for more than 12 hours. But this time, the blackout is permanent. In the light of day, New York's urban jungle is prowled by creatures unaccustomed to fending for themselves. The horses that once carried police officers and pulled Central Park carriages must adapt to a life with no humans to care for them. In a world of concrete and steel, can these horses survive? The problem isn't beer, but water. Without power, the 700 pumps that once emptied the subway system of an average of 13 million gallons of water a day are no longer operating. The tunnels are already beginning to flood. It's 6 months after People. New York City is dark, except for a strange glow in Times Square. Installed in 2009, this illuminated beacon of the human past is a billboard that doesn't rely at all on the municipal power grid. 90% of the sign's power is generated by 16 wind turbines. The rest comes from an array of 64 solar panels. The sign's power plant generates enough electricity to power 6 houses for a year. The turbine's blades were designed to resist freezing in winter and to automatically slow in the face of hurricane-force winds to prevent damage. The sign should keep glowing for years, unless something unexpected happens. One year after People, the plaza at Rockefeller Center in Midtown Manhattan is still a gathering place. Only now, it's animals that congregate here.
One of the changes that would take place in New York if People were out of the way is that the native animals would move back in. There are already a tremendous population of deer in the suburbs of New York. You may see deer right in the heart of the city.
In the time of humans, this concrete chasm was a plaza that transformed into an artificial ice rink every Christmas. This winter, Mother Nature provides her own ice.
What would happen is water would freeze during the winter on the rink area itself and would pile up. And during the spring, the little iceberg would melt and continue to add to the water underneath the buildings themselves. And that would begin to deteriorate the foundation.
In the springtime, the sunken plaza becomes like a giant flower pot.
The ice rink would definitely become a garden early. It would be wet more of the year, and that's good for growth.
Lording over this urban garden is the statue of Prometheus, a figure from Greek mythology credited with creating mankind. He now presides over the destruction of what man has created.
The Prometheus statue itself would survive very, very nicely. It's bronze, it's gilded, and for the first 5 or 10 years, the gold gilding on top of it would continue to shine. That's what gold does. But it's a very, very thin layer. The rain, the hail, the dust that blows around would eventually scour it down to the original bronze.
Years into a life after People, every street corner in New York City is dark, except for one. But the wind and solar-powered billboard in Times Square finally flickers out. It's not for lack of power, just a simple matter of having nobody to change the light bulbs. Meanwhile, the survivors of the urban horses that once patrolled Times Square and pulled tourists around Central Park have fled the city. But can they possibly survive for long in a life after People?
The horse is an animal of the plains. It's largely a grass eater, And what's more, its escape mechanism from predation is largely to run. It's also a pretty good fighter if it needs to be.
So the horses here in New York City, they have the potential to go wild again, but they need certain things. They need grass, they need open space to run. Golf courses are gonna look great. All those suburban yards around New York.
But soon, the yards and golf courses will turn into forests, which don't provide the grassy grazing environments that horses need. In order to survive, these horses need to find a suitable habitat in a hurry. Surprisingly, their best bet is to head for the beach. The grassy barrier islands of the Atlantic coast have already proven their ability to sustain herds of wild horses. In the time of humans, several hundred of them made their home on Assateague Island, just off the coast of Virginia and Maryland, the descendants of horses brought here by man 300 years earlier.
No reason why there shouldn't be wild horses on Long Island as well. But it's a question of, are the horses, if the police horses or other horses that escape, are they going to find those places in time?
At Rockefeller Center, the walls of the buildings have undergone a strange transformation.
The seams between the blocks of the limestone that coats all these buildings, those seams would catch a lot of seeds and a lot of dirt. And even 20 or 30 years out, you would probably see a green grid begin to spread out over these buildings.
Plants have already shown a relentless drive to colonize places in New York where they were never supposed to be. This is the High Line, an elevated railroad track that runs for 22 blocks along Manhattan's West Side. It was completed in 1934, allowing trains to make pickups and deliveries directly inside warehouses and factories, from the meatpacking district to Hell's Kitchen. But rail traffic declined in the 1950s as more cargo was being transported by truck. The last trains rumbled along parts of this line in 1980.
Here you have a structure that's predominantly steel. It's in Manhattan, but nobody walked on it. Nobody paid any attention to it, except for the wildlife and the wild plants of the city.
This ribbon of wilderness high above the city streets is proof that the Big Apple will turn green very quickly in the absence of humans. High above New York City, the stainless steel crown of the Chrysler Building still shimmers. In the time of humans, the building's low-maintenance steel only had to be cleaned twice in a span of 76 years. On the 61st floor, 8 stainless steel Eagle gargoyles keep watch over the city, constantly buffeted by high-level winds.
The Chrysler Building is particularly exposed to the wind because there's not a lot of tall buildings to the east of it. The gargoyles are not really fastened super tightly to the structure of the building. They're an add-on. They're basically bolted into place.
Its connection to the building corroded. One of the wingless Eagles takes its first and final flight.